Hello and welcome to the Boostara podcast. I am your host, James. The Boostara podcast is where we meet leaders in business and education and uncover truths and insights from their amazing experiences. Today, we are very fortunate to be joined by PSHE Solutions, John Rees. Welcome, John.
Thank you, James. Good to be here. Yep, I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Brilliant, brilliant. Where are you calling us from today, John?
I live in Doncaster, sort of midway between Sheffield and Leeds, but I'm a recent immigrant to Yorkshire. I've only been here 20 years, so I'm still a bit of an incomer. I'm still flattening my vowels as we go.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, yeah, I'm not sure if you get the hint of Yorkshire from myself. I try to go as bland as possible, but brilliant. Well, John, could you start off? I suppose for those that are not familiar with yourself, and even for those not in the education field, more business leaders are unfamiliar with the term PSHE. Could you just give us a little bit of a rundown as to who you are, what you do, and how you've gotten into the business that you're in at the moment?
Yeah, sure. So let's start with let's start with PSHE. So personal, social, health, and economic education. It's a bit of a catch-all subject, but it's sort of sex and drugs and everything else. But I think probably more. I'm sure we'll come on to this a little bit more than that. It's about students managing their interpersonal relationships. And we tend to think of that then as going on to be sexual or intimate or possibly sexual relationships. But of course, relationships with people in the dinner queue, as if you're in industry, you need people who can work in a team, who can collaborate, somebody who has good enough relationships to deal with a stroppy customer. So for me, it's very much the subject is very much the glue that holds society and schools and communities together. In terms of me, I was a slim and curly-haired young PE teacher. That was a long time ago. I was deputy head of a secondary school in Devon. I spent 12 years at Exeter University involved with a sex and relationships education program, which is across the UK and overseas. And for the last, 20 years, I've been an independent consultant supporting schools and other organisations with personal, social health and economic education.
Mm.
And as I say, I think for me, it's very much the thing that enables schools to function effectively. I think there is a danger, and again, perhaps we'll come on to this, that we tend to see it as a bit of sort of nice to have. We're supposed to be able to tell the kids about some of those things to kind of keep them safe. And it is about the safeguarding curriculum, but it's so much more about enabling students to manage themselves, manage their relationships, and be contributing functional members of a community and eventually of society.
Amazing, amazing. And I guess for PSHE, was there a spark, a moment that kind of drew you into this area of education and consulting with schools?
Um, Not particularly, I think is the I think sometimes you fall into these things. I do remember having a very stroppy group of form tutors, just a really difficult group of form tutors in the school where I was working, and I rang the guy.
Tutors, not students.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
The kids were fine. Just a group of, I found them really awkward people who perhaps weren't really committed to this kind of working. And I was asking them to do things and talk about things that they didn't find very easy. So I thought I'll ring the local authority, I'll ring the guy and see if he can come in and just help offer some training or something. And I remember speaking to his secretary, and I said, "Can I speak to it?" And she said, "Is it about the job?" I said, "I know it might be. Send me the details." So then all of a sudden I took a secondment from teaching and I ran the Devon Healthy Schools program. And then, as I say, I started working at the university. And that was quite a big turning point for me. And as I say, I did that for 12 years. And although I could have then gone back into the classroom, schools change pretty fast. And although I've been in and out of schools all the time, it seemed like a good idea at the time to set myself up as an independent consultant. I'd moved from Devon up to Yorkshire. Um, because I'd fallen in love with a midwife, and that's worked beautifully. And it's actually far more convenient being independent in Doncaster, where within an hour I can be in Nottingham, Hull, Leeds, Bradford, slightly longer to Manchester, depending on the traffic.
Mm.
Whereas from Exeter, you drive for an hour and a half and you haven't got to Bristol yet. So it's far more convenient to be placed here, and it works really well for me. And I think also I remember having a conversation with my brother, and I was saying, whatever it is, it's got to make a difference to people. And he said, yeah, what I do makes a difference to people. I run a business that sells office equipment, and that employs secretaries, and they can buy their kids Christmas presents. And I knew he was taking the mick at the time, but it's for me a passion to enable teachers to work more effectively with children and young people, not just in terms of the traditional academic subjects, although those things are important, but that whole wider perspective I think we need to have to equip young people to deal with a highly sexualized, fast moving, social media driven world. And how do we help them make sense of all that in amongst climate change and political machinations? A few years ago, I don't want to get too political, but a few years ago, for many, many years, schools have been saying to children, it's really important, you mustn't lie and you must tell the truth. And now we have politicians lying with impunity and then lying about lying. And I think it's really important we help children and young people make sense of that world so that they can find their role and their place within it. Again, perhaps one of the things we'll talk about in a few minutes is that I worry about the sense of disenfranchisement or distrust that many young people have of society, of politics, of industry, of commerce, and how do we help them reconnect with that so that they feel they've got a stake in their own future.
Mm. Very interesting. And I mean, and you see firsthand schools, head teachers, teachers, students, on a daily basis. What would you say is the most pressing issue facing all of those today? Because I suppose an issue for a student is an issue for the teacher, is an issue for the head teacher, is an issue for the school on a whole. And has that changed over time within the realm of PSHE?
I think it has, and education has changed more generally anyway. And the pressures on schools and on school leaders are colossal. Um, with such extraordinary demands from Ofsted, but also from parents and from industry, we have to keep getting better and better each year, and that's simply not realistic. I think in many respects. So many head teachers in primary schools as well will feel under phenomenal pressure to deliver on some fairly arbitrary outcomes. Sometimes in a
Sometimes.
world, sorry, sometimes in a world where parents are feeling more entitled or more stroppy or more that they feel they've got more access. I was talking to a couple of heads yesterday, a week into their holiday, and they were just saying we're still getting emails from parents wanting to register a complaint about this, and what are you doing about that? If I wrote to my accountant or a solicitor, that's fine. They're away on holiday for 2 weeks, and then they'll take 10 days to get back to me. But parents, I think, oftentimes, sometimes quite rightly, need to speak to heads and schools immediately. I suppose, in some localities, we know that knife crime, substance misuse, violence against girls and women can be huge. And in some places, it's all three. We
Mm.
have a crisis in young people's mental health, which I don't think we're addressing particularly well. It's great to have access to therapists in schools, but actually we need to train teachers to work more therapeutically. We don't offer teachers enough training or understanding, for example, around some of the neurodiversity that's becoming so more prevalent or so much better recognized now. And I think it's really that we put teachers in a really tricky place. We've got people leaving the profession in droves. I don't know many teachers who would recommend their kids to become teachers. And I
Mm.
think we do need to, as a society, we need to look at that incredibly carefully because at the moment I worry that we're failing our young people. Sorry, it's a bit of a rant, but we also need, Professor Becky Francis is looking at the new curriculum. There's going to be some changes made. I suspect they won't be as radical as they should be or could be. We've got a curriculum that is not fit for purpose. It's
Mm.
irrelevant to 30% of kids in secondary schools, and we wonder why we've got a national crisis in attendance. We need to work on these things. There's a psychologist I do some work with called Tony France. He says that children's capacity for learning directly correlates with their capacity for relationships. And we now have, for 5 years, we've had statutory relationships and sex and health education in
Mm.
schools. And as I say, I reiterate the point about the potential for PSHE education to improve, help improve academic attainment and behaviour for learning. And if we get students to understand and manage their emotions and manage their relationships and understand the world around them, they will achieve better. Happy, healthy kids learn better. And I think we perhaps not paying as much attention to that as we could and should.
Interesting. I mean, does the worsening issues, perhaps as you see it, or deepening of issues within schools? I mean, does that for you? Does that present? Oh, there's more work. There's more need from a sort of selfish business point of view, or is it not that simple? Is it? How does that present as challenges for you in the work that you do?
Yeah.
Because obviously, I think you, from an education standpoint, would be happy that there are no issues and you don't need to, run any kind of intervention. You don't need to consult with schools, head teachers, tutors, and in that way. But with a changing climate, I think you touched upon it. Things like social media, violence towards girls and women, these things that we're seeing more and more and more of, knife crime. What challenge does that then present to you as a consultant working in these schools?
That's a good question. To be honest, the biggest challenge for anybody selling services to education, whether you're selling catering services or PSHE or plumbing, is that schools have got no money.
Mm,
The grants to schools, the money that schools have, has continued to diminish and diminish and diminish in real terms. It's great that teachers have had some pay increases, but sometimes that hasn't been met by additional government funding, or perhaps the funding just about covers that, but the cost of everything else continues to increase,
yeah.
and therefore one of the other pressures on school leaders and head teachers particularly are budgetary pressures. I'm governor of a school in a very deprived community in Leeds. For the first time ever, we've had to set a deficit budget. When the local authority people came in to help, they were just saying, we don't know what else you're going to have to cut to be able to continue to fund, the gas and the heating and the lighting and the caretaking staff and the teaching staff and the books and the pencils that we need to buy. Education is seriously underfunded. And I worry that, again, the implications for our teaching staff, but also the whole culture and ethos of schools. So the bigger pressures, probably I should have said right at the start, are those of finance.
Mm,
Just throwing money at a problem doesn't always solve it, but my goodness, it would make a difference at the moment.
mm,
Schools really are under tremendous pressure, and therefore they're not buying in the services, whether that's services around teaching of English or maths or whatever, or behaviour management. They're tending not to buy those things in. I suppose in many multi-academy trusts, particularly, let's say, there will be people who know quite a lot about the teaching of maths or English, but no
mm,
teachers have ever been trained. Very few teachers have ever been trained initially in personal, social health and economic education or relationships and sex education. They might get half a day during their training time if they're lucky. And then people, I suppose, like myself, would acquire that experience over quite a number of years.
mm,
But we need to support schools to be able to do this better.
mm,
I think sometimes if we've got some of those challenges that we say young people are facing at the moment, about knife crime and misogyny or whatever else, sometimes the intuitive response is not necessarily going to be the most effective. We've become very knowledge rich in education. And I'm sure we'll talk about AI or something like that in due course, but simply having the knowledge or the information in terms of managing my behavior is not enough. If knowledge were enough, we'd have no overweight doctors, no nurses that ever smoke cigarettes, and no teachers that ever drink too much wine. It's not enough just to know about the problem. You've
yeah.
got to be able to do something about it. Although
Mm,
there's recently been some guidance from the DfE just 2 weeks ago, which is now starting to look about skills and personal attributes, and that's going to change or should change things quite a bit.
mm, mm,
I've drifted from your point there, James, but I think the part of the difficulty for schools is, of course, everybody's a blooming expert.
yeah.
Everybody's been to schools, so they know how schools run. But we've had government ministers, waking up just one morning saying, "Well, I think everybody should learn maths to the age of 18." We haven't got enough teachers to teach kids to 16 at the moment. And I'm
Mm,
not saying that teaching maths to 18 is necessarily bad, but we just don't have the resources
mm,
to do that. a government minister wakes up and just said, "Oh, this was the curriculum I had in the 1950s. That's what we need a bit more of." And for children who are starting school now, who are going to live into the 22nd century, we have no idea what that looks like, except we know that change will be a constant and they'll have to deal with problems that we don't even yet realize are problems. They'll have to deal with the things that we know about, like the end of oil, like climate change, like um, we'll still be arguing about Brexit, no doubt, in 70 years' time. But I think the important bit is to provide an education which is sufficiently adaptable and flexible, develops children's resilience, develops their critical thinking skills, develops their capacity to be discerning users of the internet. All of those things are crucial to PSHE, crucial to society for the individual, but also ultimately making young people more employable as well. So we have work to do.
Yeah, yeah. And, I think very, very well said. I mean, I can attest for the maths and English up to 18. As far as I've seen it within college education, it's more a tick box exercise, or it's become a tick box exercise actually for the colleges, rather than something of actual value and meaning when the people delivering it are untrained maths and English teachers. It doesn't make sense in that way. And I think you hear from parents, from students, things that have echoed over decades of, is this what I'm learning going to be any use in the real world? Um, you hear that echoing and echoing and echoing, right? And I guess for 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 uh, for any head teachers that are interested in implementing a stronger sort of PSHE solution into their school, what's the common sort of misconceptions that you face when you're dealing with those head teachers that reach out to you, they're interested,
Mm.
but they've got a certain viewpoint or a certain
Sure.
misconception.
I suppose the other bit we should add to that is, of course, we have this particularly British focus on academic attainment
Mm,
rather than recognizing the importance of more. I can't even think of the word now. More practical solutions, more BTEC and NVQ courses, and we tend that they don't have as much parity of esteem oftentimes in our programs, and we need highly skilled tradespeople who can
mm,
capital whether that's the green economy or electricians or plumbers or hairdressers. Where we need those practical vocational courses
mm,
that to give people a fighting chance to better themselves and to generate more income for themselves and their families. In terms of the things that head teachers face, I think again it's oftentimes perhaps heads not realizing the potential for PSHE to contribute to students' academic attainment. And perhaps as PSHE people, we haven't been good enough at that. We say, oh, it'll do things around, sex and drugs and healthy eating and those. And we need to extend this into primary school. Of course, it is
mm,
statutory in primary schools as well. But we need to recognise that, as I say, not just in terms of a list of things that people can do or think, woes that we need to address, but actually to give kids opportunities to develop their self-confidence, their speaking and listening skills, their
mm,
self-reliance. All of those things are fundamental to it. And there's a danger, I think, as I say, that a few years ago, a colleague of mine was talking to a year 10 student, and he said, "What's your PSHE like?" She said, "It's like Buffy the Vampire Slayer." He said, "What?" He said, every week there's a new horror. If it isn't smoking, it's drinking. If it isn't drinking, it's... And we kind of grind our way remorselessly through
yeah.
an issue-based approach, rather than saying, actually, do you remember a couple of years ago when we were saying, if somebody was trying to persuade you to throw some litter out of the window, and
Mm,
how did you say no? Now let's have a think about that if somebody was trying to persuade you to vape or to take something you do, that we need to have that iterative spiral curriculum, we would call it in education, where we revisit not just the knowledge, but the skills that young people have. And also, I think perhaps again, the schools don't recognise this perhaps as much as they should. So much of the curriculum is about information, it's about the individual. And I
mm,
would suggest that our PSHE is a collective experience. so that when young people are discussing topics, how would you stand up against bullying?
Mm.
What could you say and what could you do, particularly if that was online? And rather, I could tell kids how I dealt with a bullying incident in 1972, but it's of very little use to young people who've grown up with the internet in their left hand.
Yeah.
So again, we need a different style of pedagogy, a different style of teaching and learning.
Mm.
We've got lots of teachers now and heads who assume that education is, I've got all this understanding about quadratic equations or oxbow lakes or whatever it might be, and I've got to get it out of my head and into theirs so they can regurgitate it one hot afternoon next summer. And I think PSHE is education in terms of drawing from. You and I'm even further from it, but neither of us and nobody listening to this is an expert on being 15 years old or 7 years old in 2025. The young people we're working with do know a bit about it. So I think we can pose those questions. Here's a situation, here's an example. How could he deal with this? How could she respond to that? Again, important we use what we'd call distancing techniques. Sorry, it's getting a bit technical, but we used it because if I say to a young person, what do you think about what would you do in this situation? That might be completely irrelevant, and that's really exposing and could be very, very uncomfortable for a child. So we have to, how could somebody deal with this? How could they respond to that? And of course, then as those ideas are circulating, well, they could say this, they could try that. And as a kid, I'm sitting there listening, thinking, I could never say what Sam said. Or
Mm.
Ali Ali, yeah, that might work. I'd have to change that a little bit, but that will be okay. And clearly, and I'm looking around the room, that will be socially and culturally acceptable to do so. So
Mm.
that's what we want. And if somebody was trying to get me to vape or to, if they were being unkind to somebody online, I could say these things.
Mm.
So other people's problems are easier to solve than our own. It's about developing that cultural or social acceptance. Because I think we have to accept, this is not a moral vacuum. There are certain values and attitudes and behaviours we would like to steer young people towards in terms
Mm.
of their health and mental health and physical well-being, and certain values and attitudes and behaviours we'd like to steer them away from. Now, we can't enforce that. We can try to legislate, and that's probably not going to work very well.
Mm.
But if we can encourage young people to come for those pro-social, pro-health ideas for themselves, and they have a greater sense of ownership of it, that's far more likely to be effective. If I'm 15 and I come in with an indecent image on my phone and I show my mates and they go, "Whoa," there's kudos for me for doing that. If we can get to that tipping point where young people are saying, "John, that's somebody's sister. What do you want an upskirt picture? That's just
Mm.
not right, man." So I think we need to engage with young people to encourage them into some of those values and attitudes which we know are going to be better for their health and their physical health and better for their safety, not in a preachy sort of moralistic way, but just
Mm.
presenting them with facts, allowing them to make some decisions, also allowing them to get it wrong from time to time. Some of our biggest learning comes from our mistakes. And if you have made a mistake, how would you access services? Who could you go and talk to? How would you say sorry to your mate? How would you do that?
Mm.
So again, I think it's about creating those circumstances which need specific training for teachers to be able to manage those whole class discussions. And is incredibly
Exactly all of those examples that you gave there. It's teaching young people critical thinking, decision making, social responsibility, um, and actually what you just said there, that last example with the picture. I mean, I was just thinking in my head, how do you measure this? Well, you can measure it from actual results, actual decisions, things that the young people are saying. But I suppose would you say that from schools you might get a bit of pushback of sorts on implementing PSHE to a greater degree because of measurement? Because I suppose when the traditional curriculum, it's easy to measure the progress that students are making, whereas is it more difficult for schools to implement a kind of system where they can measure the results that this particular intervention or this particular curriculum or training actually has? Is that part of the problem, would you say?
it is, yeah. We are obsessed with measurement
Mm.
and calibration, and And yet, interestingly, for the last 5 years, the government have said that we've got certain attributes or personal attributes or qualities they call it, values, things like honesty, integrity, a sense of social justice. Now, I think to say to a teacher, or to a parent, has your child got age-related empathy, is a bit of a nonsense question. But just because we don't find it easy to quantify or to measure doesn't mean that it's not really, really important. We give young people the opportunity to develop. Are they more assertive? I think there are things that teachers can do in terms of their own professional observation. I've just seen Sam or heard Sam respond to an incident in the corridor or answering a question in class that I know they couldn't have done before Christmas.
Mm.
And that sense of that becomes far more subjective, I appreciate. But also to ask young people, what are some of the skills you've been working on? What are some of the values? Can you give me an example of how you've done this? Um, just rewinding for a second, also, you talk about the long-term impacts. Apparently, Ireland, as a country, recycles more than anybody else in Europe. Part of the reason for that, apparently, was that they did lots of work with children in school, often in primary schools, about the importance of recycling. The adults said it was a bit of a pain. You'd only go to put something in the bin, and some ankle biter would say, it doesn't go in that bin, it goes in that bin. But the pester power of children has changed the behaviour of adults. Those kids now themselves are becoming adults, and they
Mm.
recycle more than anywhere else. So
Wow.
it is a long-term game that we're playing here.
Mm, mm, mm,
And also, as I say, I think we've tended to think about young people's knowledge in terms of sex and drugs and healthy eating and all those usual kind of suspects. But we haven't looked at that in terms of actually if that young person is better able to manage their behaviour. Or, for example, I was observing a trainee teacher recently and a girl was sitting at the back thinking about putting her hand up and she didn't. And I said, did you want to ask a question? And I can't now remember whether she called it a boff or a keener or a swat or whatever the local put down is. Oh, I didn't want to put up my hand. I didn't want to be. Big. I wouldn't say that's directly necessarily misogyny, but if
mm.
a young person, particularly a young woman, is worried about putting her hand up because she's been laughed at or teased or whatever, or perhaps the teacher wasn't going to respond too well to it, we need to change the social soup of that classroom. We need to change the way the teacher responds to questions, and that they insist on young people treating each other with respect, even if that isn't the main purpose of the lesson, so
Mm.
that that young woman can ask a question which will probably be of benefit to lots of other kids in the class as well.
That's very interesting. I think I heard it said by an old teacher colleague of mine. I don't know how much of this is correct, but um, girls will tend to not want to answer because of the idea of perfectionism.
Yeah.
That's brought up in the sort of gender identity that as a girl you've got to be absolutely perfect in the way you look, the way you dress, and everything that you say. So the idea of giving an answer that is incorrect is a big no-no, and also in terms of your written work in lots of areas, and that can be obviously very challenging for a girl, for a woman, if you're going through that process day by day. So a lot of what I can see with PSHE is it goes really deep, right, into how we're bringing up children in the first
Yeah.
place, right?
You're absolutely right. I think there's some really interesting literature I was reading probably 20 years ago from I think her name was Janet Holland. Uh, she talked about how we criticize young women for not using or for failing to use barrier contraception, for not insisting on condom use.
Mm,
And she explained, of course, that if you are stereotypically for a young man, you've got to be knowledgeable, randy, up for it, confident, all of those things. And she said, if a young woman displays some of those characteristics, that's likely, insist on barrier contraception. She knows all about it, blah blah. That clashes with her notions of her own femininity. So that's a bit, and she's worried it clashes with his notions of her femininity in a heterosexual relationship, and therefore it's easier not to say anything. And
mm,
there's a lot to unpick there. But again, I think as we're developing our understanding of neurodiversity, we're
mm,
developing our understanding of how the brain works. We need to capitalize on that and continue to develop our understanding and explain that to kids. I'm actually going to a meeting with some colleagues at Huddersfield University later this morning. I'm hoping to write some lessons around teaching kids how the adolescent brain works. And the
Mm,
adolescent brain works differently from the prepubescent brain, from children before puberty, and it works differently as an adult, simply because of the way that the brain structure continues to develop. And therefore we know that young people will see risk in quite a different way.
mm,
As a 9 or 8 year old, you will see risk quite differently. As a 27-year old or a 47 or 67-year old, you will see risk in a different way.
yeah.
But if you are sort of 15, why not run along here and jump into this deep water? All my mates do, and who the hell would want to live to be 25 anyway?
Mm,
And we can see the problem with that. Of course, it's actually, in terms of evolution, it's a really good thing. I suspect my days of running across the plains chasing the saber-toothed tiger are long gone. But if I was doing that, and the young bucks are saying, "Come on, John, there's two of us now. Let's go and attack this mammoth." I go, "Whoa, hang on a sec. Should we just wait for some reinforcements here?"
yeah,
we
yeah.
we and also we need to understand the neuroscience or the sociology of children changing. There's something that happens around and I'm kind of right on the edge of my understanding here. There's something that happens around puberty where historically and in evolutionary terms, I have to move away from my primary caregiver because they're going to
Mm,
shuffle off this mortal coil at the age of 35. Whatever. I've got to establish myself with my peer group because those are the people I'm going to grow up with and I'm going to grow old with. And if we can understand that or get young people to understand that better and understand, therefore, the pressure of peer influence and what that's doing to us, at least if I understand how that's working, understand my responses to that, I hope I'll be better in a better position to do that. And if that allows me to say, "Come on, lads, stop saying unkind things to that girl," or that's
mm,
probably not how young people would say it, but let's keep it as
yeah.
polite as possible. But if we can develop that self-confidence or that awareness, say, "Do you realise how upset she was when you said that? Come on, mate, that's
Mm,
not the right thing to do. You're going to apologise." Yeah. So we need to, I think, work with young people so that they understand some of the stuff that's going on in their brains and therefore then better able to manage it.
mm, mm, mm. Very, very interesting. I have to ask this. You did mention it before. How do you think AI is changing how you deliver PSHE, how you consult about PSHE, the whole atmosphere of the school and the classroom as a result of having AI? Yeah, what sort of impact do you see AI having?
um, I don't know is the short. I suppose what I think some of the things we do know. I was talking to somebody 12, 18 months ago who said that AI is going to transform society more than electricity did.
Hmm.
And that's phenomenal. I think that's huge. One of the things I would say to any parent who's listening, any teacher who's listening, or any governor who's listening, if you haven't already done so, please spend a bit of time working out a letter that will go to parents when a deep fake, an AI image of the head teacher or somebody, a student or whatever, doing something illegal or inappropriate circulates on the internet. We know that producing an AI image of somebody doing something grossly inappropriate is now so easy to do that we need to have our response ready. If dear parents, we've been told that this has been circulating on social media. We've interviewed the person involved. Please be reassured. I don't want to use the word alibi, but we are confident it is not them. This is an AI generated image. 30 years ago, I was working with a head teacher who said you've got to plan for the best and hope that, sorry, you've got to hope for the best and plan for the worst. She said, when the phrase that stuck with me is, when your heart is breaking is not the time to be making up policy.
Yeah.
So I think when this, oh my goodness, there's this grossly inappropriate image. For 150 years, we've been saying the camera never lies, and now it does. So we have to have our response ready to say, "Oh my goodness, this is just now hit the press." And the Daily Mail and there's 150 journalists camped outside the front door. What are we going to do? What are we going to say? And I think in a calm moment, it's the same for any, perish the thought, the death of a child or the death of a member of staff. We have to, we as you say, when your heart is breaking, we have to be able to almost go to the manual, open it. What is it we got? Oh, we've got to do this. We've got to do this. We've got to. Oh, we must stand there. So I think in terms of the perils and the terrors of AI, we
Mm,
as a very basic thing. Personally, I think the teaching of maths to 30 kids, even if they're in a set group or within a limited sort of academic attainment group, I think a computer could probably, plug them into the computer where they can get excited about the gamification of it. That could be a great way to do things.
mm,
But what the computers and the AI stuff won't be able to do or can't do yet is develop the interpersonal skills, the discussion, the thinking, the conversation, the managing of relationships.
mm.
So I think there would be changes that AI could bring to education, which may not even mean kids turning up to the same building at the same time every day. We're still a bit obsessed with that. But to
Mm.
find ways of using AI to to make education more engaging but more purposeful in some respects, and leaving the humans to do the bit that humans can do that the computers can't yet do.
Yeah,
Does
yeah,
that make sense? I mean,
yeah,
I've
yeah.
dived at a superficial level. I think AI is phenomenal. Teachers will be using it to help plan lessons. Um, it still needs editing. It still needs our intellect and professionalism to make it right for this particular group. But if
Mm,
give me 10 ideas on this, so what are the five most important things of that? It's just awesome in terms of what it can produce.
mm. Yeah, the opportunity that it brings for learning, for development, but also I think the need that students are going to be living in a world full of AI in the next 20 years,
Yeah,
that they also need to have an understanding of it. That I think that's a definite. But like you said, the first and foremost is the safeguarding of students, safeguarding of teachers should be taken into account because you see these nasty things happening already, and those are only going to snowball more and more and become more accessible for people that want to use this kind of technology for sort of ill harm, right?
yeah.
I'm interested, John, for you at your level, running your consultancy, do you use AI to any sort of extent in your own role?
As I say, I think it's great for planning. You give me 15 ideas or give me recently, as I say, the Department for Education produced some updated guidance, and you can feed both documents into AI and say, give me the differences. That would have taken me days to work out in my brain.
Yeah.
Uh, that I think we can use it in those relatively simple terms. But AI's probably been around 2 years, maybe two and a half.
Yeah.
Um, and already it is producing the most phenomenal stuff, which we can all benefit from.
Mm,
In 10 or 15 years' time, it will be awesome in every sense of the word. And I think we haven't really started to capitalize on that yet, and we are
mm,
going to have to adapt to it.
mm.
I can sympathize, colleagues in. I was going to say there are concerns for oh it'll destroy children's memories. I don't know if it was Plato or Aristotle, one of those. They were very against the use of the stylus because if people write things down, it will stop their brains working, and they might use it to write rude words. Now I'm
Yeah.
sitting here with a pen. It's probably not doing my brain too much harm at the moment, and I've managed to not to write any naughty words in the time
Thank
we've
you.
been talking. but I think we have to embrace the technology. We have to get our children understanding and conversant with it, and we do have to talk to them about some of the extraordinary kind of moral and ethical dilemmas that we will face. We can use AI in terms of medicine to do extraordinary things, but we can also use it on the battlefield,
Mm,
and we can use it in Gaza or whatever. But we can use it in places where it could be a phenomenal source for good, but it could also be. Where do we stand on cloning, for example? Now that's
mm,
strictly AI, but what is that okay? Do we think that's all right? And I think we do need to encourage young people to think about some of those big kind of moral questions that are facing humanity more widely as the climate change continues to to deteriorate once the Sahel becomes unlivable. I was looking on the news yesterday in places like Turkey and Cyprus
Oh
and in
yeah.
Greece, and temperatures of 50 degrees. Um, in a few years' time, I wonder that the pressures on society as those places become uninhabitable will
Mm,
be terrifying.
mm,
If we think we've got a migration problem yet, at the moment we ain't seen nothing yet.
mm,
And I think we again have to educate our children to think about some of those things, to dispel some of the racism or xenophobia that can come
yeah.
with some of those things. And we have to take a
Mm,
global perspective, which might mean some great big blue sky thinking, or it might be about the little bit of recycling that you do, or the fact that you turn the light off, or you choose not to
mm,
fly or use a gas guzzler.
mm. Yeah, yeah. That is very interesting. I mean, I was talking to someone in international education recently, helping students get enrolled into UK universities, US universities,
Mm.
and he was saying that there are significant challenges that students don't want to go to international universities any longer because of sort of more racist, more xenophobic, more closed off kind of cultures that we're having at the moment. Everywhere is becoming more closed rather than more open. And I believe that the correct teaching of PSHE and in that way can open and should open people's minds. Not close them, right? And yeah, if anything, PSHE is more relevant, more important today than probably it ever has been, and more needed, right?
And that allied very much with citizenship there. If we're going to reduce the voting age to 16, we desperately need appropriate political education to explain to young people what voting is, why it's so
Yeah.
important, and for them to understand some of the choices they're making.
Yeah, yeah, amazing. Yeah, John, what can I ask you next? I think it is about the future. Yeah, where do you see yourself and PSHE solutions going sort of forward in the next 5 years? You painted that sort of grim picture towards the end, but yeah, what's what's in store for you?
Yeah, goodness, hell in a handcart, I think, probably. Ah, um, I'm in the fortunate position. I love what I do, which is a very privileged place to be. Um, we need more money in education. The government have sort of hinted at, oh, there might be some training money available to schools
Mm,
for training staff, particularly as they've just released this new guidance. I think actually within the new guidance there are some exciting kind of messages. Instead of just relying on the facts and the knowledge, we're developing skills, we're developing students' attributes, and therefore how people teach will be good, and therefore you need people like me to to do that. Personally, I'm looking forward to working in some schools in Bradford and the Isle of Man, and actually I'm going to Cyprus as long as it's not too hot
wow.
in the next few months. But I think the as education and society continues to evolve and change, we desperately need to change the education diet that we're giving our children. If we
Mm,
look back at the curriculum, I think it was 1908, and look at the current curriculum, they're not that much different. In fact, apart
mm,
from changing things like home economics to something else, it ain't a lot different. And I think if we're serious
mm.
about equipping children, young people who are going to live, as I say, into the 22nd century, we need to change what we provide with them. Personally, I'm working on a thing called safeguarding scenarios, is really exciting with a couple of guys. We haven't quite launched yet,
Mm.
but the idea is we're creating a library of scenarios that the safeguarding lead can choose, and they select the right one for them, not to catch anybody out, but to encourage safeguarding conversations amongst teachers and other people as well.
Mm.
And that for me is really exciting. And there's a huge amount of work to be done to get that off the ground, but that's very exciting. And I think if we, as I say, if for those of us in the fortunate position of loving what we do,
Yeah.
of making a difference to society, to children, to staff, to their families, and the ripple effect that education has, for me is awesome. Um, and as long as I can keep moving around and breathing in and out and doing it, that's good enough for me.
Amazing, amazing. And John, if anyone wants to reach out to you,
Oh,
any schools, governors, other organizations, what's the best way to get in contact with you?
I have a website, but you can just email me, pshesolutions@gmail.com, and I'm very happy to do. I'd be happy to pick up. I know, for example, there are people who are very worried about the teaching of particularly sex and relationships education. I'd be very happy to have that conversation. I'm not into slagging people off. Let's just have a reasoned debate as to, the government have just said that we should be using the names for correct genitalia with, I think, 5 or 7 year olds. I need to check the detail. I don't think they've actually,
Oh,
but
wow.
at that early age. Why? Because it improves children's safeguarding.
Mm.
And we need to have that mature conversation about how that works. I was working with some head teachers last summer, and one of them in a primary school said 32 children are starting in reception, the youngest children they have in school. 6 of them already have their own TikTok account. I mean, personally, I think that's tantamount to child abuse. But
Yeah.
given that's where society is at the moment, how are
Mm.
we working with those parents and those children to ensure that we not only keep them safe, but enable them to use the benefits of social media and engaging with wider communities in an appropriate way?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, completely agree. Yeah, and I will put those contact details below, John. So anyone that's listening, they're just below. But I suppose to finish off, I mean, thank you very, very much for joining today, John. It's a fascinating conversation.
Thank you. It's
Thank
been
you.
lovely to talk to James. Thank you, and very happy to get in touch with anybody who'd like to continue the conversation.
Brilliant, brilliant, and thank you everyone for listening.